Hi, everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here. So what I wanted to do is, I have a couple items as far as on the agenda. And so just to take a couple minutes to explain who Telecom is, as well as our overall multi-year journey with Soroco. So those are the first, just a couple minutes. And then what I really wanted to do is I wanted to focus on our success stories. As Sam had mentioned earlier, one is for an insurance company based in the US, and the other one is a telco that's based in the UK. And also wanted to talk a little bit from an innovation perspective on what we're seeing in the marketplace for our clients, as well as what we're thinking about doing internally. So with that, from a company perspective, I'm just going to go the whole thing. From a company perspective, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Tech Mahindra. Tech Mahindra is one of the largest business process outsourcers. However, we also have a very large consulting arm. So part of that is with Tech Mahindra BPS, or Business Process Services. Navicus, where I actually lead the consulting group, is one of the newest business units within Telecom. So what we've done is we've pulled together a number of capabilities from consulting, from AI, from CX, managed tech, from analytics. We've pulled all of that together in order to help clients with a digital transformation. Now, the reason I said that is because when we're going through a couple of the case studies, one is specific for a client that we worked with. Another one is specific to a client that we helped and we transitioned from internal operations to Telecom BPO. So it's a combination of the two from a client perspective. So as far as for our journey, we were early adopters, as you can see. 2021, we started working with Scout. It was on a client for the UK, and it was initially just a proof of concept. It evolved into multiple teams. We went up to about 18, 19 teams over a period of over a year. It was enterprise-wide, so there was a lot of back office. There was a little bit of contact center in there. Initially, as I said, it was for the UK, and we delivered that in 2022. From that project, that expanded into both UK, Ireland, as well as India, so multi-geography. After that, we also delivered our first project in the US, and we also created a Soroco global practice. From there, what we did was that we were the first partners that were recognized as far as to complete the Soroco platform training. And as you can see, we were also recognized as one of Soroco's platinum partners. So based upon the success that we had in conjunction with Soroco and with our clients, what we did was that we also established a Center of Excellence. And that was in 2023. And as you can see, we've moved into 2024. And we were the first partner to complete the masterclass with Soroco. And we're continuing to work with various global clients, as well as really being focused on those outcomes. But again, we're also looking at it from an internal perspective on how would we be able to drive further benefit and further value with business process outsourcing as well, and helping as far as from IP and assets and all that good stuff. So this next slide, this is similar to what you just heard from Sam and from Rohan as far as for different clients' challenges. Okay, so as far as from a client challenges, and I mean, this is familiar for all of you, right? Is that going back to, if you think about what Sam was just talking about, or what Rohan was talking about, clients aren't coming to us and saying, oh, okay, you know what, I think I might need to deploy Scout in XYZ. They're coming to us and they're saying, you know what, we need to reduce costs. We need to increase revenue. We know that our processes are broken, but we don't really know how. We don't know what to look for. We know that we need to reduce our workforce, but we're not really sure exactly how to streamline the workforce. So if you think about it from here's the financial component, there's the people component, there's the process. Again, going back to what you just heard, there's a lot of disparate technologies out there. There's a lot of applications. You just heard David say that he had 376 applications, which were more than the people that he had, right? So there's a lot of technology considerations out there. And then the last thing is really from an experience perspective. If that's from a customer, and we have like poor CSAT, customer churn, that obviously is based upon end customers, right? However, we also, if we're looking at it internally, that we have our internal customers. So our employees could be our customers as well. So it's not necessarily always from a churn perspective, but it's also from our net promoter scores, it's from our CSAT. What do our employees think as well? So with that, what we did was that I put together 2 success stories, as I said, one for insurance in the US and one for telecom in the UK. Now, from a US perspective, this was it was a very interesting client, as you can see on the screen. It's one of the largest home property and casualty companies. Now, from a process perspective, if you think about it very simply, it's home and auto. Those were our 2 focus areas with Soroco. So based upon that, there were a lot of complexities. There were also a lot of carriers or insurance companies that they dealt with. So they were dealing with over 120 different insurance companies, depending upon if it was home or auto, depending upon the line of business. They also have a lot of franchises from an agency perspective for the insurance company. They were across 35 states. And on top of that, which isn't on the slide, one of the things was that they also were owned by a private equity firm. So the private equity firm was like, what is going on with some of these requests? Why are the handle times so long? Why do we have this many people? Why can't we streamline? We need to reduce costs. Typical stuff, right? So if you can see up on the slide that we have 4 different areas. One is for challenge, then what did we find, then what did we fix, and then what was the outcome. So again, for this P&C company, that it was really home and auto. So we had common, I'll go to challenges. We had some of the common areas. As far as for the processes, it was interesting. There were some that were common across both home and auto, right? If you think about it for an insurance company, it's cancellations, it's renewals, it's requests for documentation, it was cancel to pay, those types of things. Then there were also very specific processes for the line of business. If it's for auto, you're gonna change a vehicle, or you're gonna change an owner, or for home, that you have mortgage verification. So if you think about the number of insurance companies they were dealing with, the number of processes and sub-processes, the complexity was very, very high. And they were also trying to do a transformation from their system side. So at the same time when we were doing this, that they were saying they were in the process of identifying and implementing a new contact center as a service platform, new conversational AI, how are customers gonna come in? But it goes back to what Sam said, is that it was totally the dark side of the moon, because there were so many complexities with all of their processes that they really had no idea what was causing their handle times and what was causing the amount of work on the back office. So, and I probably should have said at the beginning that for this client, that they were contact center for voice, and that they were also back office, primarily email. So it was a combination of those as well. And there was a very high volume of manual effort that was required. So what took place and what we started to find was, it was fascinating actually, because when you think about the sub-processes, and again, we probably had about 30 some odd sub-processes across auto and home. And so what they were looking at was not only the specific sub-process like a cancellation or a renewal, but what was the impact on that insurance carrier? And how much longer was insurance carrier, if it was your insurance carrier, for example, how much longer did it take an agent to deal with your company rather than your company? So they were able to look at those components. They were also able to identify, based upon the insurance companies and the additional amount of time it was taking their agents, because their agents were not identified by each insurance company, obviously. It was more multi-skill. So one of the big things was identifying what the differences were, and did I need to change my cost structure even? Or did I need to get rid of some of the insurance carriers? So there were a lot of business things that went into what we found. So we identified a number of things that could be simplified. We identified, going back to what Sam had said earlier, talk about variations. They were under the impression it wasn't necessarily straight line, but they figured they'd have a few variations. One of their processes, it had over 20 variations. They're like, how could this possibly be? And it's like, well, this is all data-driven. So again, from a standardization perspective, that we were able to really go back to the PE firm, to senior leadership, and say, this is what's really happening. There was a significant potential as far as for automation and self-service, and Scout was able to help us identify that. From a fixed perspective, again, from an effort There were a lot of from an interaction data analysis, is that there was a lot that we could do on automation. So identifying some of those processes, and it might not be the entire process. A lot of times it was just pieces and parts of that process, right? And so looking at the interaction data and figuring out what could we automate with RPA. And the other thing too is that what could we identify as far as for training, from going back to what was mentioned earlier, from the SMEs that were the tenured agents, right? So you could see that I knew these shortcuts versus people that had just been brought on and where some of the training was lacking. So that was the second thing. The third thing was really having the process documentation. They hardly had any documentation whatsoever. And so they were able to go back not only to operations to start making changes, but they were also able to go to the PE firm and leadership to say, this is why it's taking our people so long. These are the additional capabilities that we need to have implemented in order to move forward. So then as far as for outcome, you could see we had over 50% as far as for in-scope processes. We identified further insights as far as for optimization, standardization. That was incorporated into their transformation that they were doing with their new systems. And also, we had also identified continuous improvement initiatives for them. So that was for an external client. So now this is an external client. However, this was a client, this was out of the UK, and what they wanted to do is that they wanted to transition some of their workforce from internal agents to Telecom as a BPO service provider. They wanted to do it in a very short amount of time. They hardly had any training documentation. Their process documentation, everything was it was pretty much of a mess. And they wanted to transition very quickly based upon costs. So again, they were one of the largest telecom providers in the UK. So as far as for the challenge, again, it's similar to what we just talked about from the other one, which was B2C. This is B2B. So this was enterprise. And this was specific for provisioning and activation. So from a process perspective, they lacked the documentation. They had a lot of manual effort. There was a lot of transfers between the agents. And they had really super long handle times as well. Similar to the B2C that I just talked about, just in a different environment. So as far as for the find that you could see on the screen, what we have is that the high inconsistency in productivity. And this was really, really evident as far as from the SMEs that were the tenured agents versus the newer agents. And based upon BPO operations, that we wanted to reduce our client wanted to reduce the number of headcount, and they also obviously wanted to reduce their costs. So it was significant to understand the interaction data on that and identify the potential as far as for both training, for the documentation that was actually used in that transition, as well as automation. So as far as for the fixes, I mentioned about RPA from automation, that we did identify a number of training opportunities with this client, and that we were able to assess over 70% of their overall volumes, which was huge in a super short amount of time. Now, as far as for the process design documents, or Rowan had mentioned about SOPs, is that we were able to produce those in like 6 to 8 weeks. Now, the overall project itself was like 3 to 4 months, but because of the transition, we needed to have that documentation as quickly as possible. And that wouldn't have been possible without Soroco and Scout and the interaction data that we had. And then as far as for the outcome, again, streamlining the processes, we identified insights, and then we also identified additional transformation for some AI capabilities as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, from a Telecom perspective, that we have both BPO operations and we're consulting with clients, right? The other thing that I didn't mention, which is on this screen, and we're talking about it, and we've had multiple conversations with Soroco on how we might be able to use Scout Graph, Work Graph, and the interaction intelligence from Scout. One is as far as for our internal processes. Obviously, we're a huge multi-billion-dollar corporation, right? Some of our processes are not working as well, and which all of us can relate to, right? So taking a look and figuring out how can we leverage Scout in those areas internally. So this has nothing to do with clients. This is just all internal operations. The middle one is our BPO differentiator, and that goes back to the UK example that I gave, is that figuring out how we can leverage Scout in in future opportunities, so then that way we could say, we can bring your folks in, and instead of having 100, 200, 300, that we can optimize, we can streamline, and we can transform, but it's all data-driven. So it's not like we're waiting for talking to the SMEs. We could say, this is what we think that we could do, and then having that interaction data and having those insights support that for our clients. And then the third one is really transformation. And that's similar to what we did as far as with the insurance company, is that transformation for our external clients and from a consulting perspective. So it's really those three pillars that we're seeing moving forward as far as with Soroco. And our last one is from a continuous improvement and continuous innovation perspective. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because we have a couple other speakers that are going to be talking about S/4HANA. But from an S/4HANA migration, a lot of our clients are asking us about that and looking at it from, like, really two-pronged. If you think about it, for defining the strategy and looking at it from like the global template design, as well as how are we going to do the actual migration. So, but as I said, I'm going to let the other two speakers talk about that. It was brought up when Sam was just talking to David as far as about APR. You could see up here for the application usage analysis is really understanding like how users are using applications, what are some of the applications that can be consolidated, what are various fragmented, what can be integrated, and really looking at it from, okay, here's our data, but here's from the screen to the data to the actual interactions themselves, and really getting into more of that detail as far as with the APR and the rationalization. The other two things that we have identified up here is that from an internal Tech perspective, working with clients, there's a number of our clients that they know they've been working with process mining, so they have some of the light, but they still have the dark side of the moon. So it's really having the visibility for that 360-degree view to really understand what's taking place. And the interaction data and the interaction intelligence is obviously key, because those are the areas that a lot of times they're like, we have no idea what's going on. And their last one is the Work Graph Accelerator. So if you think about everything that's been talked about today with Scout Work Graph. From an accelerator perspective, we have a lot of our clients that are coming to us and saying, can you accelerate us getting to the results? Like, how much quicker can you give us insights? And so based upon our experience, we're looking at it from various use cases, repositories, working on building assets and IP, and obviously this is in conjunction with Soroco.
You talk about leveraging Soroco solutions for BPO customers, but many times when you're working with BPO customers, you're working on the client environment, right? You're logging through a VDI on their platforms. How do you deploy Soroco in those environments where you're not operating on your systems and get the work graphs, et cetera?
Well, that's an excellent question. From a client perspective, it depends on, like, when you said that they're working in a VDI environment, that we still need to access their environment in order to have all the keystrokes and to gain that interaction data. So there's times that we've worked with clients that if we have the environment, if it's our environment, which obviously is easier, right? Then what we've been able to do is that we've been implementing Soroco, we're actually doing it right now, that we're taking a look and we're using Scout to figure out what could be some of the insights in order to go back to the client. However, from a VDI environment, that's where it gets, as you know, that's why you asked the question, that gets a lot trickier. And so it's a matter of figuring out, and we've done that in conjunction with Soroco, to figure out, like, how do we implement Scout and those capabilities in the client environment to really understand what the keystrokes are coming from our agents. So from a configuration perspective, that gets a lot trickier.
Thank you.
So I know you wanted to hear that it was a lot easier, and I gave you a complete answer, but I had to give both.
The challenge you would have in that environment is because many times you have to jump through tons of hoops.
Oh, absolutely.
To get the client onboarded.
Well, it's the whole InfoSec and stuff. Yep.
Yep. It's very tricky.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That gives you an idea of what we're doing with at Tech and with our various clients. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight. Thank you.